Okay, so the second example for section 11.1 is number 10 from the homework set, and this is one that is going to have some trig functions in it. So we have a sine and a cosine. We're going to handle that a little bit differently, but I would suggest starting off the same way as we did before. Go ahead and get a graph. So get your table set up. We know that t is between 0 and pi. I just picked a few points here, 0, pi over 2, and pi, because those were easy. I don't have to get a calculator out to do any estimating for decimals, etc., etc. I can get a few points. If I think I need some more, I can add some in. So based on these t values, I have plugged them in to the equations for x and y, and I have gotten my values for x and y. So I started off at 1, negative 1, and then I moved to 2, negative 2, and then 1, negative 3. And then I have traced my path with my direction so that I know which direction the path was following, okay? Now, that gives me my graph. Not really sure what that looks like. Possibly part of a circle, possibly part of some sort of a parabola. Okay, so, sorry. If we look at the domain and range, just so that we can see if, the graph is following along with that fairly well. The domain is going to come from the x value, which was 1 plus sine t. And if t is between 0 and pi, sine is always going to be positive, and it's never going to get bigger than 1. So that means that the value of sine t itself is between 0 and 1. So if sine t, this value right here, is always between 0 and 1, that means that 1 plus sine t, if you take 1 plus 0, that gives you 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. That means that 1 plus sine t, which is x, is always going to be between 1 and 2. Okay, and then you do the same thing for y. Well, if y equals cosine of t, and again we're stuck between 0 and pi, cosine is always between negative 1 and 1. So if t is between 0 and pi. So if we plug in negative 1, we get negative 1 minus 2, that gives us our negative 3. Plug in 1 minus 2 is negative 1. I made a mistake and didn't put my negative on that. Make sure that you fix that on the notes because I did not get that correct, okay? So I just missed my negative on that. Alright, so x is always between 1 and 2, and then y is between negative 3 and negative 1. Okay, which jives well with what we have on our graph. Now, in order to get the equation, when you have the trig functions, what you're going to do is you're going to use trig identities to help you get your equation. So you're going to want to think about, for example, in this one we have basic cosine and sine. So a good one to go to might be just to use the Pythagorean identity that cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Fairly basic, and I just noticed I messed up on my range there too. And we'll see if we can make it look like a Cartesian equation that we would recognize. So if we use that identity, we plug in, we know from our two equations that x equals 1 plus sine t and y equals cosine t minus 2. That lets us find sine. So you plug x minus 1 in for sine, and you plug y plus 2 in for cosine. That gives us this Cartesian equation, which is the graph of a circle with a radius of 1 and a center of 1 and negative 2. And the domain, again, is between 1 and 2, and the range is between negative 1 and negative 3. So it looks like we have that correct. Just a quick reminder on circles. This is your standard form with your radius and your center. So that's how you find the graph of a circle.